Hello, everyone. We're just going to give everybody one more minute to join before we get started. All right, well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for Eunomia's Fit for the Future webinars. We're absolutely thrilled to have you. Today we'll be discussing Oregon and navigating Oregon's Recycling Modernization Act, looking at LCAs as part of EPR. So just before we get started, a couple very quick housekeeping items. This presentation is being recorded, and that recording will be made available to you at the conclusion of the webinar. We will also be sharing out the slides as well. So no worries on that front. We've set aside some time at the end of the presentation for questions. So please use the Q&A function right in the middle of the top of your screen. There should be a button that says Q&A. So please, you're welcome to drop a question in there at any time, and we will be answering them at the conclusion of the presentation. So with that, I will hand it over to Sarah Edwards, the head of New York office. Thanks, Sarah.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to one of the Fit for the Future webinars that Eunomia has been running over the last year. If you want to move the slide on, please, Caitlin. This Fit for the Future webinar series effectively covers a number of different kind of legislative topics that are impacting our clients and have covered everything from PPWR in Europe to this latest series that will focus more on some of the imposing legislation that's in the US. A little bit about who we are and who you've got on the call today. Just go back one more slide. So as I said, I'm Sarah Edwards. I'm the president of Eunomia Research and Consulting in North America. Eunomia is a B Corp certified kind of boutique consultancy that has over the last 25 years been really instrumental in the passing of much policy related to packaging and other materials at their end of life. So as a consultancy, we work heavily with the European Commission on some of the environmental policy that comes from there, as well as in the last 9 years, really supporting the evolution of packaging and other material related policies. So on the call today, you've got Caitlin Kelly. She's a consultant with us in the New York office, and she'll be taking you through the slides and managing the Q&A function. And then our resident expert on life cycle assessments and as well as some of the wider kind of policy implications that we're seeing through EPR policy in the US, which includes some things like source reduction planning as well. As a business, we've been, as I said, operating for 25 years, and we've already covered 3 main kind of themes: the circular economy, which we've been working on for those 25 years, low carbon economy, which is very much linked to some of the material use and how we can better manage material to reduce those emissions, and then the natural economy, which looks at, to some extent, supply chains and the use of materials and within those supply chains. We are, I think, well known for being policy experts, as I said, covering many different areas, including packaging, textiles, and we pride ourselves on supporting good policy in the fact that as a team, we have people that have got deep-seated understanding of how systems work at a grassroots level from operating facilities, so can really help inform policy, good policy. We're material specialists as well, and some of that will come onto as part of this LCA work, but we really understand how material can be used in the production of new goods and packaging, and we have a real cross-section of expertise, and as I said, we know how things operate at grassroots level all the way through to understanding how these costs might affect brands as well as other stakeholders. And we're very well known for providing unbiased credibility, credible outcomes that are unbiased. And we'll see shortly in a slide that we do provide services to NGOs, state governments, as well as brands and their industry associations. So we can provide an unbiased approach to the recommendations that we're providing. And over the last 20 years, we've really excelled at developing tools that can help make the job easier, really, for you to both understand the cost of EPR, but also consider the LCA impacts that some of the packaging that you might be using is having. Next slide, please. And as I alluded to earlier, this is just some of the cross-section of our clients. So you can really do see that we're trusted by many different organisations, from some of the big state departments that we're currently working with, like CaraCycle and Minnesota, through to NGOs like doTERRA and Greenpeace, as well as industry associations like GPI and CBA. Next slide, please. And just a little bit of context, I suppose, as to why we're doing a number of different webinars specifically focused on the US. You know, we've become a global leader really on extended producer responsibility over the history of the organisation. And in those last 9 years, we've really been seeing the transition in Canada, as well as what's happened over the last 5 years in the US. And we're lucky enough to have worked in Washington, providing some insights into the earlier modelling of extended producer responsibility that led to the passing of SB 5284. We're currently working in California on 2 needs assessments, so that's giving us really good insights on the collection, processing and end markets of packaging material, as well as crucially the source reduction based needs assessment, which is really going to set out some of the expectations of how the 25% source reduction by 2032 target can be met. We're also currently working with Minnesota and with Illinois on their needs assessments, and have been involved and completed Colorado's and Maryland's and Oregon's over the last 3 years. So this kind of background gives us really good insights into some of the topic we're going to discuss today, as well as a number of other areas that are affecting brands and their packaging producers resulting from EPR and other policies such as recycled content mandates. So I'm going to now, I think, pass it over to Caitlin to take you through a little bit more of the content specific to LCAs, and then over to Simon.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So as many of you know, extended producer responsibility is about shifting responsibility for waste management financing from governments to producers, and requiring producers to fund the collection and processing of their products and report back on their progress. Now, Oregon is unique at the moment in using LCAs as the mechanism for this reporting process, but that certainly isn't happening in a vacuum. As many of you know, this is part of a suite of legislation that's being passed across the US. A growing number of US states are introducing EPR for packaging programs. 7 states at the moment have passed the regulations to enshrine those programs, and Oregon is the first to approve and start to implement their actual program plan. So before we dive into the particulars of the LCA and those requirements, I just wanted to take a minute to kind of briefly review Oregon's EPR bill as a whole and kind of provide a bird's eye view just to make sure we're all on the same page. When a state passes EPR regulations, they typically nominate a producer responsibility organization, or a PRO, to administer that program. In Oregon's case, this program is administered by the Circular Action Alliance. I'm pretty sure CAA is on our call today, so thank you so much for joining us. Producers of covered products are required to join that producer responsibility organization, and they'll be assessed annual fees to help fund the end-of-life management of those materials. Now, every state and every EPR program has a slightly different approach to what qualifies as a covered product. In this case, we're specifically talking about printing and writing paper, food serviceware, and packaging. Oregon's approach, as we'll hear in more of the details in a minute, but the EPR program creates both a compliance pressure as well as financial incentives for brands who are putting these materials out on the market. Oregon has released a list of the top 25 largest producers, and those producers are required to evaluate the life cycle impacts of the top 1% of their products and report on those impacts every 2 years. So while those LCAs, or as Oregon refers to them, life cycle evaluations, that reporting process is mandatory. All producers are eligible to voluntarily undertake LCAs for their products and disclose the reports in an attempt to qualify for one of 3 bonus schemes that can issue a fee reduction on the fees that are assessed to them annually. So that's just kind of a brief recap of the bill. And with that, I will hand it over to Simon.
Thank you, Caitlin, and good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. I'm in the UK at the moment, so good evening from me. So yeah, I'm going to talk to you about the LCA in more detail, what it is, what it means for you if you're a producer, some of the key things that you might want to think about as you're responding to this, some of the benefits you might get from some of the bonuses you might want to go for, and how we can help you along that journey. So, first of all, I think it's quite useful to have a bit of a baseline understanding around what LCA is. I appreciate not everyone would understand what LCA is, what it's for, and it can be a bit of a mystical subject. So I'll try and demystify some of that for you today. So LCA is essentially a standardized method for quantifying the potential environmental impacts of a product or service, typically across its life cycle, but not always. These life cycle stages can be from raw material extraction through to manufacturing, distribution, use, and end of life. So what does that mean in reality? What are we trying to achieve? A lot of the time you're trying to achieve things like a comparison between one product and another to see whether you're improving or see whether you're better than a competitor's product. It's also quite useful for looking at where what we call the hotspots are in your process or your product. So you can focus on reducing those and reducing the environmental impact. And it's quite important to recognize that environmental impacts are quite heavily linked to financial impacts as well, because if you're using energy, you're using materials, these things are all costs to you. So there's a very big link between reducing your environmental impact and reducing your costs overall. So these are reasons why we might want to do LCA independently of this subject area. In terms of how you would go about doing an LCA, a very basic diagram there. I'm trying to keep this in a sort of layperson's terms as much as possible because it can be a very jargon heavy subject. But essentially what we start with is a lot of activity data, or what in the industry we call life cycle inventory data. And this is all of the things that happen, all of the inputs and outputs that take place within your production process throughout the life cycle. So am I using coal for burning, or am I using a certain material? Am I in my factory? Am I sending some effluent to the water course, or am I sending it up into the atmosphere? All these inputs and outputs are essentially activities within your life cycle of your product. And so these are key data points that you need to understand, and I'll go into that a little bit more later. We need to marry that then with environmental data. So it's the kind of so what element of this. You do all these activities, but what does that mean? How do we translate that into environmental impact? And I'm sure you all recognize issues around climate change and greenhouse gases. Well, this is essentially just converting the idea of CO2 being put into the atmosphere and taking that and converting it to a greenhouse gas conversion, which has a global warming impact associated with it, which in turn impacts the climate. So we have a lot of different impact categories, which I'll also talk about, that can be converted from your activity data to your environmental data, and that gives you your environmental impacts. So that's it in a nutshell, really, in terms of what LCA is and what it's trying to do. And now we have to think about how we want to go about it, and some of the key factors that are important for Oregon. So as you might have heard with Oregon, there's they are typically looking beyond life cycle impacts that are in other LCAs that we see around the world at the moment. I was involved in an early stage with the DEQ in Oregon, helping advise them on some of these issues, because they really wanted to go beyond what current LCAs did, but recognized that actually there was a lot of methodological issues with this and a lot of challenges. So I and a few others helped them out with this, but we're still in early stages with looking at these other impacts beyond what is typically seen. And so currently what they're looking at is 16 impact categories, and these impact categories are all the kind of different places in which the environment might be affected by your products. And these are under the EF 3.1 methodology, which is a European methodology. It's become a sort of standout in methodological terms. But they also wanted to look at additional things like marine plastics indicators. And importantly, these are only for bonus B, and I'll talk about what the bonuses are in just a moment. But the focus here is on the bigger bonuses, essentially, to focus on these. So they have two plastic impact categories. One is plastic leakage, which is literally a case of the amount of plastic that is modeled to be released into the environment. And the main reason for that is that they want to understand throughout the production process, throughout the life cycle of the product, how much plastic might be emitted into the environment. And that's an estimate more than anything, but it's an important foundation for the next stage, which is to look at the plastic impacts in the marine environment. And so this is all about, again, converting that, well, this is what we think happens, but what does that mean in practice to marine life, essentially? So these are quite new methodologies, which is why they're sort of appended or slightly separate and not required for all LCAs under the scheme. But DEQ thought it was very important to start thinking about these and start including these metrics. The third one here, which hasn't been talked about so much in outside of scientific circles, is methane leakage from oil and gas. Now, this was another one that they were very keen to include. And when we had these conversations, maybe 18 months, 2 years ago now, this was quite a virgin science, I guess, in terms of like understanding this methane leakage. And for a number of years now, scientists have actually been trying to measure the methane leakage using satellites to see methane coming out of oil and gas exploration and reserves as it's being removed from the ground. Things that you can't really quantify on the ground, or the industries behind them were not very good at doing that, shall we say. So now we've actually got some really good data around how oil and gas is actually producing a lot of methane, and this has now been put into our data sets that we use in LCA more generally. The upshot of that generally is that what it's actually pointing towards is plastics in particular have a much higher impact from a GHG perspective than we've seen up until recently. So if you're a plastics user and worth looking at methane leakage and including that in your LCA, the impact might be 10 to 30% more than perhaps you would have seen in an LCA that was done about 3 years ago. So we're in a sort of before and after situation here where LCAs from about 3 years ago might be very different from ones that are conducted in the last year. So just moving on now to the bonuses that you might get from conducting an LCA, because this is obviously the most important part of Oregon's bill here for you. So the first reward you might get is getting paid just for measuring, essentially. So from just producing the LCA. And the point of this is to encourage a bit of transparency, encourage the uptake of LCA, to encourage you to think about your products more. And we know through our work that just the act of going through the process of an LCA, several light bulb moments might come on when you start thinking about your product more, start thinking about your processes more. Your production engineers start thinking about it in a different way. Your marketers start thinking about it in a different way. It's definitely shines a light on your products that you didn't think about otherwise. And that's essentially what Oregon want to do here. So just literally producing an LCA, regardless of whether it's good or bad, there's no judgment in this at all. It's more like let's get that transparency out there. So you can, as part of that, you can receive a 10% credit on your base fees for that SKU, and that's up to a maximum of $20,000 cap per SKU. So, for example, if your fees were $200,000 for one of your SKUs, and you got that 10% credit, then you would have that 20,000 back. And essentially, you can also do that on a maximum of 10 SKUs. So you could essentially, on a $2 million bill, you could get 200,000 dollars back from that. So that's the very basic side of it, and requires you to have an LCA report, which I can go into a bit more detail in the next few slides. Next one we have here is bonus B. And we feel like this should be the ultimate goal, because you're getting rewarded for the improvements you're making to your packaging. So this is a big change from the previous bonus A, which is quite a straightforward LCA, because you're not in bonus A, you're not producing any kind of comparison. You're just drawing a line in the sand. Here, for bonus B, they recognize that this is a lot more work, both in terms of the LCA, but more importantly in your product design process, and therefore your benefit is much greater. So you can earn a graduated bonus based on the level of improvement between 10% and 70%, up to a maximum of 50,000 cap per SKU. And the idea is it would always be higher than bonus. And importantly as well, it's based on a function of the bonus A as well. So to get that maximum cap, you would have to have a tier 3 bonus on your improvement. So I think that's something like 50% plus improvement, and that is then 2.5 times bonus A, which gives you your $50,000 cap. So that's quite a lot more, but there is quite a lot more to it, as you can imagine. When you start comparing products, you run into a lot of difficulty around setting the baseline, setting that comparison, how you compare that fairly. It's obviously a lot easier within your own product groups compared to what I tend to normally end up doing, which is comparing products between competitors, because you always want to know whether you're better than someone else. But this is just, are you better than the thing that you've done before? And so that's a harder thing to do, but you should have the data or have access to the data for both options there. So how does this sort of translate into reality here, or at least an example of how this might look? So here's one of the examples that I've transposed from the CAA example that appears in one of their documents. There are many permutations of how these might work for you, and I think this is going to be one of the challenges around how you understand how the fees work for you, and then what the potential benefits are. But in this case, we've got a scenario where a producer switches from a rigid container to a lighter monomaterial HDPE pouch. So they're doing a material switch, doing a format switch as well. The base fee is 222,000, but after that change, you get new base fees for 99,000. So that recognizes the reduction in material and the improvement in recyclability of the material. So that's a pure material change there. But then you do the LCA and you work out that you get an 82% reduction in environmental impact, and that hits you in tier 3, and that's a 2.5 times bonus A reward, which gives you almost $20,000 reward for that change there, and therefore your net fee is 79,000. So you can see through design changes, and LCA can help you with those design changes. I think this is a very important thing. This LCA might be used to prove that you've done a better change and get those fees, but also it can help you with your design process as well to decide whether this is a good thing or not to do. So it's not just a back-end thing to do right at the end, say a little tick box. You can also use it as a design tool to help you understand and make better decisions at the front end. And this is what we always advocate. Don't just use it as a tick box. If you're going to do it anyway and you feel like there's a benefit to it financially, use it for its full potential, which is to help you through make good decisions and keep making those decisions throughout your process. So as you can imagine, this can be quite hard to navigate. You've got a lot of LCA terminology. You've got a lot of terminology from Oregon and CAA. It can be a bit daunting. So it's our opinion that in order to get this strategic path through, you do require an expert guide. And the challenge here is a compliant LCA is not a simple exercise, and it does require deep expertise in a lot of the areas that Caitlin and I and Sarah have been talking about today. So you do have to navigate the complexity of the life cycle evaluation rules, and they're not straightforward. They're not a carbon copy of rules from elsewhere. They're taken from all kinds of places, and for good reason, but there isn't an off-the-shelf thing that you can use right now in a lot of cases. We expect there will be in the coming years as people develop tools and services, but right now there's a lot to navigate through as we're all understanding how to do this. You need to gather and validate the right supply chain data. You need to manage the required third-party verification process. So a very important aspect of this is whatever you do, you have to get this verified by a third party. And I think that's going to be a challenging process because I do third-party verification for LCAs myself, and it's something that you sort of do on the side of your other work, you know, as a friendly helper to other LCA practitioners, and it can be quite interesting to see other people's work. But it's very different to then have it as a sort of commoditized thing that people do on a daily basis. And there are quite a lot of rules around who can do this verification as well. They have to have a certain number of years, a certain number of LCAs under their belt. So it's not something you can jump into straight away. And the pool of people who can do that and want to do that, it's unclear how big that pool is at the moment. And finally, translating all that into a technical report for a compliant project for CAA. The risk, therefore, is that an invalid LCA means no bonus, but the cost for completing the LCA. So that you don't really want to fall into that risk. So we're looking at a three step path towards a compliant LCA. The first and arguably the most important step is actually before you even think about doing an LCA is your scoping and your strategizing. So, and this kind of falls outside of how you would do LCAs normally, because you don't tend to think about a strategy around it. You tend to think, what's an interesting question we want to ask and answer? What's a marketing advantage we can get? But think about the broader strategy around, well, what products should we focus on to get that best bonus we can over the next 3 to 5 years, because it might not always be obvious. And we're in a quite a good position where we don't necessarily have to do a full LCA ourselves to give you an idea about, well, if you change this material for that material, what's it going to look like? You know, having that experience behind us, we can give you a pretty good idea whether that's going to hit the right mark or not before you've even put pen to paper or put any data behind it at all. And so it's important to look through your portfolio, look through your product development phases over the next 3 to 5 years, and trying to marry that up with the bonuses available and how that might fit across the next few years, and really strategize around, well, what's the most benefit you can get? What fees are you going to be charged over the next 3 to 5 years? How can you reduce those fees? But also, how can you also marry that up with your product development that you're going to be doing anyway? So this first phase is going to be really important, and you have to have a pretty good understanding of design, EPR, and LCA all together to have that idea around strategizing in that area. Stage 2 is, let's do the LCA, let's get that data, let's verify it, let's understand what's going on and produce that model for you, or series of models, depending on how many products we're talking about here, and then handling the third-party verification. And then finally, producing that report that can get you that bonus and get it out there in the world, and deliver that for the submission to CAA on time. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a whirlwind quick view about how we might go about this, some of the key issues you might face, and some of the potential benefits, because I think this is a genuine opportunity for a lot of businesses to not only reduce the fees for themselves, but also if you're a producer producing packaging for others, you might want to offer this as a service internally to those you're supplying to, and we can help you set up that service. Essentially, we can help you strategize internally around, well, where are your biggest customers and who might you want to talk to about this more generally. And finally, from me, just some key dates to help you out here. Some of these earlier dates we can see have been and gone, but the key dates for next year are quite important to remember. March 31st, we have the final list of the top 25 producers is released. So this is the top 25 who have to produce an LCA on their top 1% of products. So we will get that final list published by March 31st. And then by December 31st, they have to have submitted their life cycle impact evaluations from those top 25. So very key dates for anyone who fits into that group. For everyone else, May 31st is the voluntary bonuses for A, B, and C. I haven't mentioned too much about C because it's still a bit up in the air at the moment, but that's around if you're putting a reuse system in place. So an LCA around reuse is the focus on that. But that's definitely a whole other webinar in itself. So yeah, May 31st is the key date if you want to get in on the bonuses A and B in particular for the year 2027. So that's it from me. I'll hand over to Caitlin again, I think.
Caitlin, you're on mute. Sorry.
Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you, Simon. So developing a cost-effective strategy for your EPR compliance is really going to be governed by your risk exposure, right? Whether you are only exposed in one US state, whether you are juggling, multiple international markets with different compliance strategies for different EPR programs. But the key factor, as Simon discussed, is really to be strategic. Understanding your exposure, looking at the various costing and what those fee burdens are going to be, and how you can most efficiently comply, and how you can leverage, for example, your LCA data to encourage other or help you with other internal decision-making factors. So, looking at making the most informed packaging strategies, what strategies are going to help you qualify for the highest ecomodulation bonuses, and, developing internal strategies that can help you across all of the markets or multiple markets where you have the highest level of exposure. So those are, what you see here, just a few different ways that Eunomia has been supporting our clients. And, because these strategies are so custom tailored to each organization and their own different, their risk, as well as what tools, resonate with them internally to most effectively comply. We'd love to speak with you about how we can best help and support you as you go forward in navigating these compliance requirements, as well as just making a better, most informed EPR strategy. So my information is up there on the screen. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you'd like to schedule a meeting and discuss your organization's particular context and how we can best support you. Excuse me. Also, keep an eye out for our upcoming Fit for the Future webinars. We'll have another one on source reduction planning coming up in January. And if any of you are planning to travel to New York for the EPR Think Tank event, January 26th and 27th, we have a bunch of Eunomians in our New York office that would love to speak with you. And so please don't hesitate to reach out and we can set up a in-person meeting. So thank you so much. I'm going to jump over to some of the questions that have come in through the chat. Okay. A question from Emma Lawrence. How do the LCAs for top 25 producers differ from the bonus LCAs?
Yeah, so very good question. So the short answer is that essentially they don't, for the most part. Think of it as very similar to what you would do under bonus A, essentially. So you don't have to do the plastic leakage and the plastic marine impact methodology for the top 25 or the bonus A. That's just for bonus B. So yeah, essentially for the top 25, it's bonus A but mandatory, is the way to think about it for them.
And Simon, another follow-up question for you. What if I don't have all the data I need to conduct an LCA?
Yeah, and another great question. So I think if you haven't done LCAs before, or this is new to you, and to be clear as well, you might have more data than you think, because when we talk about LCA here, people think it's some mystical thing, but ultimately you might have done a lot of work already on carbon footprinting. And carbon footprinting is a subset of LCA. You know, when I was talking about these environmental impact categories, where we're looking at 16 of them, carbon footprinting or climate change is just one of those. So more often than not, the data that you would have had to seek through your value chain for a carbon footprint of your product is going to be very similar to what you require for your LCA. But I think there's going to be a cascade of requirements going through value chains within Oregon. So pushing these data requests to suppliers and further upstream is going to be important. So yeah, we're well versed in this data gathering stage from clients who already know exactly what data they have versus ones that have none or don't know how to ask or have no idea, and everyone in between. But I think one thing is worth bearing in mind is it's never quite as straightforward or easy as you think it is, and the time required can be more than you think it is. It can be the most time-consuming part of this process is the data collection, particularly if you haven't always got stakeholders on board within your wider company. If you've got everyone on board and you've got access to the people who are really motivated by this, then it's a lot quicker. But otherwise, yeah, it can take time because it's not always on everyone's priority list.
Thank you, Simon. And I see a couple questions on cost. So what is the likely or typical cost of an LCA prepared by Eunomia compliant with Oregon's requirements? And I think this is a great question. Thank you to whoever posed it. And the answer is really about how, what your specific context is, how many SKUs you're looking at, how, what's part of the overall strategy, and how that LCA is, there's the LCA piece, and then the broader strategy that we can help you build around it to help reach the highest possible ecomodulation bonuses. And so it's really customized for each individual client and their own particular needs. So we do have pricing information available, but it's, please reach out to us and discuss your particular context so that we can make sure that that pricing is best suited to help you help support your own particular needs in that context. So I don't know, Simon, Sarah, I don't know if there's anything you want to add there.
No, I think that covers it. Obviously, the cost is a tricky issue, and LCAs have been known to be very expensive, or they can be very expensive. We recognise that you want to balance that with the benefit you're getting, both financially directly from these bonuses, but also more generally as well. And I think there's a lot of slightly more intangible benefits, as I talked about, to doing LCAs more generally, that are difficult to pin down from the beginning, but you always find ways to improve your processes and reduce costs as a way of getting benefits from LCA more generally as well. So yeah, as Caitlin said, get in touch with us, and we'll be happy to talk you through exactly what the costs might incur and how deep you want to go really down that rabbit hole, because it can be anything and nothing. So yeah, I encourage you to get in contact.
No, I mean, I think, as we've sort of said, even if you're doing an LCA as part of Oregon, and you're using the LCA to not just think about getting reduction in feed or, having the benefits of ecomodulation, you can also use that LCA and consider it in the context of how you might switch a packaging format. And then obviously, if you're looking at that in the context of another state where you might have to make meet specific source reduction targets, then there's kind of an additional value there from doing that initial piece of work that you might start off thinking about as just for Oregon, but then transitions to being more supportive in or overarching kind of EPR fee strategy. Because I think, you know, there is going to be a jigsaw puzzle of different solutions and actions that brands are going to have to take to make strategic decisions that kind of work across the patchwork that we kind of have in the US in terms of EPR. Other questions, Caitlin, here?
Yep, I'm just looking now. I think, Simon, a question for you. What if I use LCA software? How do I go about ensuring it's compliant under Oregon's regulations?
Yeah, this is also quite important because and there's different kinds of software we might be talking about here, because I know particularly a lot of large companies have their own in-house tools or off-the-shelf tools that they use to do their own in-house LCAs. And I think ultimately you want to be asking the supplier of those whether they can, you know, to what extent that tool in itself can aid what you're doing. It's unlikely they'll be integrating something from one state in a short period of time. So I think in the short term, you're probably going to have to work out what that software or what the outputs of that software can produce, and can it produce essentially a report that's compliant with the output that Oregon is looking for. And this is something that we're helping our clients with, is looking at their in-house tools, looking at the software they use and bridging that gap essentially, and seeing whether they can get that head start in doing this, because they've already done a lot of the work already. And the last thing we want to suggest is just redo everything in a slightly different way. It should be, well, we've done the work, now can we just report it in a different way, which is way easier than doing the LCA from scratch again. So again, this is why a cost is difficult to achieve, because you might be 2 or 3 steps down the road further than others because you've already got your tools and your LCA, but you just don't know how to marry that up with the Oregon approach. And so we can help you do that because we can sort of meet in the middle from both sides essentially.
And I think, Sam, that's Simon is touching on your question here about really, you know, is the juice worth the squeeze? You know, how does the cost of the LCA factor into the value of the bonuses? And again, it's going to be extremely dependent on your organization, your potential cost burden, and then being as strategic as possible to help you qualify for those bonuses, and being thoughtful and deliberate about how you're approaching the LCAs and making those results really work for you within your organization. So more than happy to chat offline about how specifically to make that work for you.
Yeah, and to follow up on that as well, this comes to my point earlier in the presentation where it's about creating your strategy for which products you should focus on. There might be some products that you have in your portfolio that if you produce an LCA for them, won't reduce your fees very much at all, and it's just not worth your bother, quite frankly. And so this is why this sort of process at the beginning of strategizing around, well, which products are my big hitters, which ones do I sell the most, which ones might I have the most benefit from, and really thinking around which ones are the ones that you should focus on. And then maybe, you know, in a package of work, you can put together the ones that are less lucrative, but together when you're doing you know, the full portfolio, it all sort of evens out. So again, it's like a really important thing to do that bit of scoping and strategizing at the beginning to help you understand where to focus and whether it is value for money for you to do it for some particular products and not others.
So we have another question about time. The 9-month time allowance for completion of LCA from being identified as a top 25 producer seems very short. Do you think it's feasible to complete the necessary LCA?
Well, I guess it has to be. But equally, I think a lot of the top 25 have a pretty good idea whether they're in there already at the moment, because there was an initial list that was put out a few months ago. There's a bit of shifting around of that list, and I know organisations that are sort of implicated on that list will be talking directly to Oregon anyway around this sort of thing. So I would be very surprised if when that list becomes finalized and public that anyone finds themselves surprisingly on it, and most of the organizations on that will be big enough that they will be doing a lot of this work in the background anyway, I suspect. So yeah, it would be tight if you literally found out on that day and you just started the process and just started thinking about the process. It would be tight. But yeah, if you're anywhere near that list right now and you're not thinking about it, then definitely this is the time to start doing that. And maybe you may end up off that list, but it's not time that's not well spent, to be honest, because you need to be thinking about this more generally anyway and the benefits it can give you.
I mean, Simon, what can people be doing now if they think they might be on the list and aren't on it now? Or like, what is some of the kind of questions maybe they can be asking of their suppliers, or what can they be thinking of to maybe even to start assessing whether they should even consider doing more work to kind of maybe submit a submission for any of the bonus structures, really?
Yeah, well, honestly, I'd say the first thing you should do is speak to us, because we can give you a pretty good idea about what the specific questions you might want to ask your suppliers, because it does depend on your product. I don't think a lot of suppliers want scattergun questions being thrown at them, because they might deal with a lot of different organizations coming at them asking for data in different ways and different forms. And I feel like that's just going to lead to chaos. And what we do in our approach is to be very targeted around the kind of things you need to be asking and the kind of way you want to be asking it and who you want to be speaking to within those businesses. Because one of the challenges is you might not speak to the right person if you and if you get the wrong answer from them. We've definitely seen before where data changes overnight because you asked a different person, and they actually knew the latest data, or they realized they told you that the data that you were given was wrong for various reasons or whatever. So having a good understanding of what you're looking at when you get that data is important as well. So yeah, just sort of firing off emails to every supplier, upstream and downstream, sort of setting hairs running isn't a particularly good strategy. But when I say get ahead of it, it's more like thinking internally around what do you want to get out of this? Who do you want to speak to? Get the conversations going with organizations like us that can help you navigate through that. Don't just sort of wait until the last minute and then begin having those internal conversations, because we know that the wheels can turn a bit slower than ideal. But getting those conversations moving earlier is better, I think.
And then there is a couple of questions around if I'm a retailer or distributor of a covered product, am I obligated? And if I'm a small business, am I obligated? I mean, I think the main point is, unless you're in the top 25, you don't have to do anything, right, Simon? You could say I'm fine paying my fees. I don't think I'm going to benefit from an LCA bonus, and you report as you would normally report. If you are a small producer, then, or even a retailer and a distributor, then maybe you're not defined as a producer. You have to look very carefully at the regulations to understand how you as a business would fit into the definition of a producer, and therefore more generally obligated under the legislation. But really, unless you're in that 25, you don't have to do something. But those ecomodulation is there to benefit people that are looking to provide necessary data to show that they're making improvements from an environmental perspective.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So if you're outside the top 25, you can breathe a sigh of relief. But equally, I think you should look at this as an opportunity. And it is going to be a bit more difficult for smaller producers, because if you're not paying large amount of fees, then the benefit of doing an LCA can seem like it's less. One of the things that we are encouraging is the larger suppliers who are supplying to the smaller ones. So if you're putting products on the market and you're smaller, you're probably not making the packaging yourself. You're procuring it from someone else. it seems to me that the larger suppliers and producers, this is an opportunity for them to provide an added value service across their product portfolio that the smaller producers can then key into, essentially. So they're the ones doing the LCA or having products that are ready to get that bonus down the line. And that's a bit of a USP for your products. If you're like, if they're, you know, Oregon bonus A ready, then I think that's a good opportunity and way for the smaller suppliers to key into this. Bonus B is obviously a lot more difficult, and that's more about strategizing over your product development and where that sits in the product development phases. But bonus A, I think there's a lot of opportunity there to share it out amongst other smaller suppliers.
Great. Wonderful. Well, I think that's I think those are all of the questions. Thank you everyone so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time. And if anyone would like to, as we mentioned, discuss in more detail your own particular organizational context offline, you have my email there on the screen. Please feel free to reach out at any time, and we'll be following up with the webinar recording and slides. So thanks so much, and we look forward to seeing you in January for our next Fit for the Future webinar.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks.